Hola a todos. My name is Elizabeth Smith, and I'm the Cultural Affairs Officer here at the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica. I'm delighted to welcome you to this series of webinars made possible through the dedicated efforts of the experienced educators at the Institute for Collaborative Learning, the Ministry of Public Education, and the U.S. Embassy. Teaching English is both a rewarding and challenging task, requiring continuous growth, adaptation, and learning. These webinars will serve as a valuable platform to expand your knowledge, exchange ideas, and explore new, innovative methodologies. Together, you will reach new levels in your teaching practice and inspire your students to excel in English. I encourage you all to actively engage, to participate wholeheartedly, and to share your own experiences and perspectives. By collaborating with one another, you can build a vibrant network of English teachers in Costa Rica, united by a common goal to inspire your students and shape their futures through the power of language. I cannot thank you enough for your hard work and dedication to your profession. On behalf of the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica, I welcome you again, and may this series of webinars be a productive and interesting experience for you. Buena suerte en su proceso de aprendizaje. Adelante.
Welcome, everyone. We're super happy to have you with us. My name is Mary Scholl, and I'm the director at the Institute for Collaborative Learning. And I'm here today with Matt Schaefer and Yvonne Suazo, two of our facilitators. They're our facilitation team today. Matt's going to take the lead and give us this amazing opportunity to learn today about strategic competence, linguistic competence, strategies for linguistic competence in preschool. And Yvonne's going to be here to help out with any challenges that we have at any point. So happy that Matt's here. Matt's had some really interesting experiences teaching in preschool and also interesting experiences doing teacher training around the world. So really happy to have him with us today. We are offering these webinars in collaboration with the U.S. Embassy in San Jose. So big thank you to the U.S. Embassy. And working in collaboration as well with the Ministry of Public Education in Costa Rica. We've been working with the Embassy and the Ministry since 2005. So we're so grateful for this collaboration. We're grateful to see new faces and grateful to see people that have already taken our courses and webinars. We have a special visitor with us today, and who's going to give us a special welcome. Vamos a recibir unas palabras de bienvenida de la doctora Gisela Alpizar, que es la jefa del Departamento de Educación de la Primera Infancia. Muchas gracias, doctora. Si puede. Ahí está. Ahora la
Ahí
veo.
estamos.
Spotlight.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes, estimada señora Mary. Muy buenas tardes al señor Matthew. También un cordial saludo al equipo de asesor y asesoras nacionales que tienen a cargo la Alianza para el Bilingüismo. Un caluroso saludo también para las compañeras docentes. Es para el Departamento de Educación de la Primera Infancia una gran oportunidad el poderles saludar hoy, que se inicia esta serie de webinarios que les van a permitir fortalecerse en el marco de la mediación pedagógica, pero sobre todo el desarrollar las competencias para poder desarrollar todo lo que se relaciona con la Alianza para el Bilingüismo. Es un reto país, pero es la gran oportunidad de que puedan tener herramientas para lograr prácticas pedagógicas de calidad, ¿verdad? Y que los procesos con los niños, niñas y estudiantes sean procesos también de calidad si ustedes logran procesos de desarrollo profesional. Yo les deseo que sea un webinario de mucho éxito y que aprovechen esta gran oportunidad. Así es que muchas gracias a quienes van a desarrollar el señor Matthew, porque es para nosotros de verdad el establecer estas alianzas, las grandes oportunidades para poder trascender y lograr mejoras en la práctica. Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes.
Muchas gracias, doctora. Muchas gracias.
Con gusto.
Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Matt. Welcome, everyone. and I hope that you enjoy. We're starting now. We're gonna be finishing at 7 o'clock. We trust that you'll take care of yourselves if you need to stand up and move around a little bit. We'll have maybe a little bit of movement break too along the way, but you need to get something to drink, whatever do you need to do to help you be a great learner. That's what we want you to do today. So welcome, Matt, and thank you, everybody. Welcome, welcome.
Thanks so much, Mary. Thanks, Senora Aspisac. Thanks, everyone on the MEP team for helping put together today. Thank you, all of you, for coming. Thank you for taking care of your needs during this session. And thanks for us helping take care of this need. That's right, it's the registration form. And I'd like to get started with a quick moment of community building. So before we think about developing linguistic competence and how to bring more language into our preschool classrooms, I want to take a moment to connect with all of you and to connect with language. So I have 5 quotes here. These are from 5 famous writers, thinkers, speakers of various languages and parts of the world. So I'd like you to take a moment to read these and see if any of these quotes about living out loud and proud or the power of voices or learning, see if any of these resonate with you. If one of these quotes is particularly meaningful to you right now, write the color of that quote in chat. Or you can unmute as well and let us know why one of these quotes is sticking out. I'll stop talking for a sec so y'all can start reading. I'd love to hear which of these powerful words you all are connecting with as we start our evening together. One that was really jumping out to me today is from Émile Zola, a French playwright. If you ask me what I came into this life to do, I will tell you, I came to live out loud. Like that declarative statement of one's being. We got some more votes for purple. I guess there's 2 purple quotes, but I'm just going to lump them together and we're going to go all over the purple vibes. Alrighty, y'all. Well, thank you for taking this moment to connect with me and connect with language. One of the things that's important to me in terms of my own professional development is that even though I might spend my days taking something complex like language and trying to simplify it for young learners, that I'm also making sure I'm taking time out of my life to connect with language at its peak, language that really moves me and shapes me. And so making sure I'm at all ends of the spectrum with language. Rebecca, nice to hear that quote from American author Neil Gaiman is jumping out to you about that one thing that only you have, your voice, your mind, your story, and your vision. Also, Voltaire, we're glad you're here. We are really, really proud when we are alone. That's a typo. That's probably why. All right. So before we get into today's topic, I want to give you all a big picture view of our webinar series. We have a lot of exciting events coming up. We've got 3 webinars designed especially for you all preschool teachers that are directed explicitly towards the preschool classroom and working with those very young learners in that first stage of MEP's curriculum and cycle. We also have 3 webinars that we're inviting all MEP teachers to overall strategies of well-being, reflection, and planning that we think are beneficial to teachers regardless of the age of the students you work with. So that means, including today's 2-hour webinar, there's a total of 12 hours of training that's available to each and every one of you. You'll notice that many of our webinars are offered between 2 and 4 times. You don't need to come more than once. It's the same webinar. If you're really excited, we're never going to turn you away. But know that, for instance, if you're looking at those green dates on the 12th and 15th of June, when we'll be talking about learning, playing, and screening, the integral role of the teacher in the use of technology in preschool learning, you can either come from 5 to 7 on June 12th or from 1:30 to 3:30 on June 15th. There's no need to come both days. It's not a part 1 and part 2. We just want to make sure we can be as flexible to all of your busy teaching schedules as possible. So we'll make sure to take some screenshots of this and distribute it out through our MEP channels. So don't feel like you're racing to scribble everything down. Or if you want a screenshot right now, there it was.
Hey, Matt,
So-
one thing I forgot to mention, the last 3 that are in the evening are actually at 6:30 to 8:30.
6:30 to 8:30. Thanks so much. So don't take that screenshot. Wait for us to send it to you. I'll have that there. All right. So here's an overview of today. Loud and proud strategies for developing linguistic competence. What does that mean? What are we going to do? Well, I'd like to start out sharing with all of you my experience discovering preschool and what my journey from my elementary, high school, and adult classrooms into the preschool world felt like for me. See if any of you all have any connections in your own path of teaching. I want to think a little bit about the elements of oral production, being the combination of accuracy and fluency that leads one to speak. Then I want to zoom in and think about what fluency looks like and sounds like for preschool learners, so that as we're guiding our students towards creative, spontaneous, and fluent production, we're doing so at a level that matches where they're at developmentally. Then we can think about what contextual factors will support that fluency, how to structure a lecture towards more free speaking moments, and also how to use meaningful repetition over the span of a unit to structure more and more space for continued fluency development. At the end, we'll have some time for questions, thoughts, and inspirations to share, as well as a moment to ask you all for some feedback. And a shout out to all of the students of our English Alive program who you'll see joining us in the pictures along the way. These are our preschoolers, many of whom study at Centro Espiralmaná in El Limbo de Peñas Blancas, técnicamente San Ramón, pero yo digo San Carlos de Corazón y de Clima. So that's who a lot of our students joining us will be. You'll also see some students from both Cataplinkis Play School in La Fortuna, as well as I think one student from my OG preschool, La Moreneta in La Fortuna. So I'm happy to share some experiences with them with all of you. So who am I? Why am I here? Well, my name is Matt. I'm a fellow with the Institute for Collaborative Learning. And so I work with Mary, Yvonne, and an international team of educators all over the globe on educational development projects. In my journey in teaching, I've spent over 6 years living in El Limbo de Peñas Blancas and teaching locally there, as well as supporting MEP and teachers all over the country, in addition to around the world. My first time teaching preschool was in La Fortuna. I was so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in my 20s, walking at 6 a.m. towards this preschool with a volcano behind it, thinking, wow, if California Matt could see me now. I walked into that preschool. I got a job teaching there once a week, 2 hours a week, a nice, easy foot in the shallow end of teaching preschool. And for the first 6 months, I felt like a bad teacher. I was fresh off my TESOL certificate. I had just learned how to structure really solid, productive, and receptive skills lessons with teens and adults. I was feeling hot, unstoppable, young in a brand new country, in a brand new context. Everything was going great, and then preschool came along. And I felt really, really challenged for the first 6 months. I felt like I would do things, but I wasn't seeing immediate results. And it took about 6 months before I had this moment where I was standing there on the playground watching my students, and a young girl, Nigeli, came up to me and she tugged on my sleeve, and I looked down and she pointed at the play structure and she just said, "Purple." And then she walked off. And she hadn't spoken to me up until that moment in the program. 6 months of silence for her, and then suddenly, purple. I thought about that moment a lot, and I realized that one of the most challenging things I brought into the preschool classroom were my own expectations. I had these really strong expectations of, if I present this vocabulary in this way for 1 hour, then you all will be able to speak it. They were expectations that I'd really found teaching elementary schoolers on the weekends in Elinvu. And what felt like a very close experience to me, right? How much more different can 6, 7, and 8-year-olds be from 3, 4, and 5-year-olds? I found in my own experience that difference to be a lot. I think what really shifted after those first 6 months wasn't necessarily what I was doing in the classroom, but more what I was looking for, how I would observe learning, and how I would guide students towards something that was achievable to them, rather than bringing in my expectations that worked for older learners, older young learners, to really reformat that from the ground up. And I think that experience of setting my sights on where I thought it was a reasonable objective for preschoolers to achieve, then turned around and helped me plan towards that even better. And so I think it was needing to take the time of finding my own realistic expectations. I know some of you in our audience are MEP preschool teachers who are finding your second teaching home in preschool. That might not have been where you started your educational journey, but you found your way there. Anyone out there have a similar experience coming into preschool like that, of some initial challenge or potential holdups based on prior experiences you had as a teacher?
Well, good afternoon.
Hi there, Raquel.
I would like to say that I was like surprised in some way, because one day maybe you can start your class and hoping that they learn something, and as you say, it looks like it's like a blank, or that they are not paying attention, or they are not learning. But in a few days later, they say like simple words like hello, good morning, or things like that, and that is so I'm grateful that they are learning and I'm being part of that process. So I teach kids of 5 years old, and some of them learn so fast, and some of them learn their own rhythm. So I really think that we have to be patient and follow their own rhythm, because we have to adapt our expectations, as you said, to their needs or their abilities and things like that. So I think it's really grateful for me being part of that process, because we are doing important things for them, and they are so the motivation, it's so important for me. It is so important for them learn a new language, but also as a fun activity, right? Because it needs to be fun for them to be interested in.
Yeah, Raquel, I think that experience you're sharing is really powerful and connects with a lot of what I've seen and felt in my own practice. I was really resonating with how you were talking about how students learn at their own rhythms. And especially at this age range, those 5 and unders that we're thinking about, a lot of the learning happens in silence. And I found as a teacher, silence is one of the hardest things to observe. Silence is a mystery. It could be so many things. But where I want learning to look like this, right? More time, more learning, more classes, more English. Sometimes when I'm observing silence, I can't really see anything. And then one day it feels like there's a spike. And then I get more silence and then another jump up. And so I think too, just the more I've learned what that looks like and how learning with more silence, because our students are closer to their first language silent period as well, can shift what I'm observing and how that guides what I'm doing in the classroom. Thanks for sharing, Rebecca. Colton in chat also shares that he was initially scared moving from force to first grade and then later to kindergarten, really considering what type of support student need and how can one be ready to have even more supports ready. but that one of the exciting positives that kind of came around at the end was seeing that at that youngest age, especially kindergarten, that kids were very loving and really wanting to jump into any experience thrown at them and really excited to be engaged in play-based learning. So thanks so much, all of you, for sharing here. There's a picture here that I want to zoom in on really quick. I don't think it's the most amazing preschool activity I've ever done, but I think it's a nice metaphor for a lot of what I want to share with you all today. So over here on the left, you can see several of our preschoolers over at Kataplinki's Play School, and they're working on a Father's Day surprise. So they've got a piece of paper that says, "My dad is," and then a lot of description words. And they got to choose which description words they wanted to grab for their dad. They'd have to choose, do I want strong? Do I want helpful, handsome, special, generous, intelligent, athletic? So I worked with the students to learn those descriptor words and had them tell me yes or no to decide which ones they wanted to put on their poster. Now, one thing that's a hard and fast rule for me with arts and crafts projects is I will not bring an arts and crafts project into the preschool classroom if it's not something a preschooler can do on their own. If I need to grab a marker and color something in for them, that's not going to work for me, right? If it involves a level of cutting that's really, really tiny, that's not part of the project I'm going to be working on. I want to make sure if we're working on arts and crafts, it's not the students watching me do an arts and crafts project. It's something that fits into their hands and fits with their skills, right? So cutting out large rectangles, gluing down whole words, telling me yes or no for different description words. All of those different steps fit into that preschool level and ability of my students. And that's a mentality I want to take with us into linguistic competence and thinking, what's the chunk of this that I can break off that fits in their hands, right? There might be an art project that I can do with 7-year-olds that doesn't translate to the fine and gross motor skills of a 4-year-old classroom. Alrighty, so that was my zoom in, that concept of choosing art projects that fits into the hands of young learners. And now let's see how we can bring that into language and choose language that fits into the mouths and ears of these young learners too. So let's do some multiple choice questions. Everybody loves them. Oral production, accuracy and fluency. In regards to oral competence, what does accuracy mean? Is it A, reading all of the words correctly? B, speaking correctly with very few mistakes? Or C, choosing the perfect word for each situation? What does accuracy mean in regards to oral competence? Write a letter in the Zoom chat. Let's see what our thoughts are. Accuracy, oral competence.
I can share.
Sure. What are your thoughts, Colton?
From what I was thinking is that accuracy is being able to correctly read a word, so being able to decode it correctly. That's what I was thinking it was coming from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we can have accuracy with reading, and reading accurately is that process of decoding words correctly. Absolutely. Anyone want to share their thoughts on why there might be leaning towards B or C? So I tried to throw y'all for a little bit of a loop. I know the picture is of me reading, but right now I want to think about oral competence. So I want to think about student speech and speaking. So when I'm thinking about oral competency, I'm not thinking about reading accuracy. That exists. It's totally a thing. It's just not the next thing I'm going to be thinking about with all of you. So I wanted to point that out. Looking between B and C, I see C as a piece of accuracy, but maybe not the whole thing. One part of accuracy relates to vocabulary, right? Choosing the right words that have the right meaning. But I also think that you can't have accuracy without some kind of knowledge of grammar, some kind of knowledge of the rules about how words go together. So in total, when I'm thinking about oral competence, I'm thinking about not just C, but also a little bit beyond just word choice. So for me, I'm thinking about oral competency as speaking correctly with very few mistakes, right? Correctly communicating a verbal message with a limited number of mistakes. Accuracy. How about in regards to fluency? What do we think of fluency with oral competence? I've got 3 new letters this time so we can see where we stop in chat. In terms of oral competence and fluency, is oral fluency speaking with a native-like accent, reading with speed and comprehension, or speaking easily with a few pauses and communicating a message? It seems like everyone so far has selected F for fluency. And I agree with you. I'd say speaking fluency is all about speaking easily with few pauses and communicating a message, right? So whereas accuracy is about being correct with few mistakes, and it's about the number of green versus the number of red marks on a page, fluency is about few pauses, right? Thinking really about the speed and flow, as well as overall communication of a message. And I think both of those parts add up into oral production. If I want to say something out loud, I need knowledge and skills in both of those areas. I need some practice with accuracy as well as practice with fluency. Can you have accuracy without fluency? I tend to be leaning with a lot of you. I think yes, but Colton is on to me. He knows I like trick questions. So I'm going to try and model this. I'm going to try and speak accurately without fluency. Okay, so accurately, I need to say the correct words in the correct order, but fluency. No breaking, pause. Am I making any mistakes? And is this fluid and fluent? Did I say any words incorrectly there? Oh, I wasn't trying to. Those were the right words in the right order. But if I tried to speak at that pace and with that inconsistent pausing every day, do you think I'd have an easy time communicating with people? Hola, yo, vivo, N, L. It wouldn't work. So to me, that's a model of if we only have accuracy, right? I can hit everything, but I might be lacking so much in fluency that the communication falls apart because of the pacing. You get distracted while I'm speaking and kind of fade off into the distance. Alrighty, another question. Maybe it's a trick, maybe it's not. Can you have fluency without accuracy? Who's someone in your life that you might know who you think speaks fluently, quickly, at a healthy pace, but makes a lot of mistakes? Do you know anyone who speaks like that?
My dad.
Your dad?
Yeah.
That's my dad too. If I had a birthday candle for every time my dad said my birthday wrong, I'd be like 85 right now. Your brother? A lot of heritage speakers? Interesting. Some of your students? That's the example I'm thinking. Does any of you know a baby who's just starting to speak? Who's like in that like 20 to 50 words of vocabulary? Where they're just like, Mom, Dad, water bottle. please, now. And they're just kind of saying and pointing words, right? To me, that's one example where I'm hearing someone speaking, and the real challenge isn't the speed at which they're going there, right? Or another example of this, my nephew is learning English. He's doing pretty great. His neighbor thinks he's learning his English. My nephew's neighbor does not speak English. My nephew will walk up to me and go, "Hello, Tio Matt. How are you?" And I'll say, "I'm happy." And then his neighbor will come up and go, happy? This 4-year-old is convinced he's speaking English to me. And I'll just answer him. I want to keep the dream alive, but it's just complete nonsense with like 1 or 2 words mixed in. That's another example to me of what we have if we just have fluency. I'm just throwing words at you and hoping it makes sense. Another example might be, I myself have been learning Lesko. Now, I can remember a little bit, but when I don't remember Lesko, I speak with Matsko, which is kind of my own invention. It's mostly just charades. So I would say I speak Lesko with a high amount of fluency. I can communicate pretty easy, but I have a really low accuracy, right? I think it takes the person who is like listening and seeing me speak Lesko, they have to do a lot of guessing to know what I'm talking about. And that's another area where I might be speaking fluently without accuracy. So it's possible to exist at either extreme there, but it's not ideal. If I speak really, really slow and really, really fast, it's hard to understand me. And if I just speak fluently, but words and have no mean, I can't get across there without making some accurate choices as well. So I want to think about what this looks like together over time. I think in simplistic terms, we as teachers want learning to look like this, right? I give my students more time in the classroom, they learn more and more and more. That line goes up, right? I start with them in February, we keep going all the way to December, and they pass their test. Woo, beautiful, up, 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 progress, always learning, always forward, right? I don't think learning often looks like this. Like what Raquel was sharing, on an individual level, there's a lot of peaks and valleys and places where it pivots out. But in particular, I think there's a lot of moments where the increase of learning might dip and look like a backwards movement. This is how I see the development of accuracy. When I start working with a new topic and some students, the first thing we're working on is accuracy, right? Happy, sad. Happy, sad. Is this happy? Yes. Good, students. Is this happy? No. Those are my students refining their skills of accuracy with these language. So as I bring new vocabulary into the classroom and I start out with those initial presentations, encounters, and controlled activities, my students are slowly developing accuracy, right? And I'm feeling good. Things are going up. They're moving. It's sounding, at least for some of them or many of them, I'm seeing that upward trend. But then what I notice is at a certain point in the lesson, accuracy starts to go down. Students start making more mistakes. We're spending more time on the same subject, but there's this dip. I think this transition can be really challenging, right? I think what's happening is, I want to explain this and then explore it in terms of a lesson plan. I think with the introduction of less controlled activities and more free activities, right? When I say happy or sad, and then I make a face, there's two options, right? Students are making a limited choice and it's fairly controlled. But when I look at a student and say, how are you today, Gabriel? Well, there's a lot of possibilities, right? I'm asking Gabriel to produce a word that could answer that question. he might know 10 or 15 possibilities, and he's looking for the one that matches his lived experience. So there's a lot more complexity in that moment. When Gabriel looks at my face and thinks, is it happy? Yes or no? He's choosing between two options, and there's a low level of complexity. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, with a fluent task like, how are you feeling today? Why? There's a lot of possibilities. The possibilities are only limited by the student's vocabulary and fluency at that point, right? So that really highly complex task is a lot harder. Now, I have to slowly shift from very controlled tasks to less and less control to more and more free tasks, right? I need to create that gradual release of responsibility in order for my students to move from the initial burst of accuracy and develop fluency. But I also think it's important to remind myself that there will come moments when I make the class activity or task a little bit harder linguistically, and the first thing I'm going to observe is a little bit of a dip. Maybe more mistakes, or maybe more silence. And that's not necessarily a sign that I'm going in the wrong direction, right? That I think it's to be expected that when things get a little bit more complex, the initial response might look like a step backwards, but it's actually a step towards the more complex. So I wanted to share this with you because I think this is what years later I've realized was challenging me in those first 6 months of preschool. That I was afraid to get things a little bit harder if it meant a little bit more silence. I was afraid of silence or afraid of letting them make mistakes. You know, in my desire to get them to share how they feel today, if I always want them saying, I am happy today, teacher, well, they might be stuck on I am and never get to that really expressive part with happy, right? But if I'm willing to hear, I today happy am, and see, okay, well, there's been a dip in accuracy, but I'm hearing this big step up in terms of fluency, and to be able to think where both of those things are at. So that's just an image that I think is really helpful to me. If you're not a math geek like I am, this is our last line graph of the series. So fret not, I'm not going to take you into more and more numeric territory. We'll start talking more about speaking here. So I have another question I want to ask you all. Which of the following chunks of language sounds most like the utterance of a preschool student to you? You can choose more than one answer if you'd like, but which of these four do you think you might hear in one of your preschool classrooms? So everyone's agreed on I, many people agree on J, some people toss in K, and no one has our little baby genius running around there, our statistical anomaly speaking like L. That falls in line with more or less my experience, right? When I look at these types of utterances, a long pause of silence, and then happy, or I happy. Several words together in a generally correct direction. Or maybe even something as big as today I am happy and sleepy, right? Those are all things that I can close my eyes and imagine cute little faces saying to me. But yeah, like Alexandra's bringing up, hearing something like L is not something you're likely to hear in a second language preschool classroom, right? That might be an idea of where a student's fluency is at in their first language, right? That level of first language fluency happens around 4 or 5 years old. So if you have that in your classroom, it's probably because that's your student for whom the language learning is the other half of your class. I see these quotes as exemplary of 4 big steps of language emergence. And so this comes from both like first and second language acquisition, but the numbers I'm pulling from the second language acquisition piece. And the articles where you can find all of this information and more are linked on our resource site that we'll share with you at the end of today's webinar. So if you're seeing this, you're getting geeked out by all the cool child development theories here and you want to know more, we'll share that with you by the end of today's session. So I see each of these 4 oral productions as generally connecting to one of these 4 boxes. So the student who's saying happy, who I'm thinking around is in that pre-production stage of language, right? Oftentimes we'll colloquially refer to this as the silent period. And around the first 1 to 6 months of an English language learner's time, they might make little or no verbal production. Now, again, all of these are ranges because as Raquel started us off with, all of our learners are on their own individual paths. So I can't look at any learner and write these numbers in exactly, but having some numbers rolling around in my head helps me gauge where different learners might be at in this cycle. So that pre-production is silence or maybe a tiny bit of production. That next quote we have there, I happy. That to me fits into production exemplary of early production, around to 6 to 12 months of exposure to the language. So again, this means if you've got a preschooler coming into your fully bilingual preschool class, and they're coming in telling you they have cero de inglés, then around 6 months, halfway into your year, is when you might start seeing a majority of your students making that transition out of silence. But for that whole first 1 to 6 months, a good number of your students might be in that silent period. And so to know that that's coming from a place of natural development and not unnatural results of poor teaching, right? Starting between 1 and 3 years of regular exposure, that's when English language learners will be able to speak and understand simple sentences with some errors of accuracy. Now, I know this is a webinar mainly focused on preschool, so this is close to the end of that range we're going to see. You might have a student who English is spoken some in their home. Maybe one of their parents works as a tour guide or in a hotel. And so dad has decided to always speak to his son in English and mom always speaks in Spanish. And so you could have a preschooler who has close to that 3 years of exposure. And those are your students who've been in some kind of structured language program or with consistent exposure to language that are going to be able to make utterances like, today I am happy and sleepy. Yeah, so Colton's asking, and again, this is all coming back to right now I'm focusing on the more oral production side of things. So that's why all of these involve production and speech. So the students can be listening and potentially showing comprehension in non-vocalized ways. But we're thinking about linguistic competence. And in that preschool range, speaking is really a leading skill to writing, right? Most of the theories in place now and what's in place at MEP is that the written literacy skills worked in a preschool age are pre-literacy skills. And if there's a focus, primarily focused on the first language, right? Letting students get fluent reading in their first language before moving towards reading in a second. So when I'm thinking of this, I'm really skewing us towards speaking first as that preschool production phase, right? Knowing that for preschoolers who are not yet literate in any language, the speaking is going to be the leading skill to the writing. They're going to speak first and their writing will follow that because of where they're at developmentally with their first language. So again, the passive skills, they might be able to do lots of listening here, but the amount they can then vocalize back grows along this spectrum from pre-production to early production to speech emergence. I put fluency on here for a specific reason. Now, I would say a big majority of our preschool students are not going to have 3 years or more of exposure to the English language. So the reason I'm putting this here isn't because when I say fluency for preschoolers, I want them in this box. It's knowing that overarching category of developing fluent speech, where language learners can speak fluently, accurately, and with growing complexity, that's really coming later, right? Speaking big, complex thoughts and longer extended chunks of language is developmentally going to happen beyond the limits of our classroom for most of our learners. And so I think seeing in my head where, okay, with this group of 3 and 4-year-olds, we're going to be mainly in these 2 boxes, right? These first 2 boxes. With my 4 and 5-year-olds, mainly in these 2 boxes. And if I have a mixed class that maybe has a couple 6-year-olds in it, that's where I might start getting into this 3rd or 4th box and beyond. Having those benchmarks of where students typically fall, I think helps me set up objectives for the classroom and the learning space. Are there any other questions or comments about these stages of linguistic development before we move on?
I think that it is very important to I don't know, explain to the parents this part, because sometimes they are expecting that their kids, even though they are very small, could speak very fluently and accurately. So I think that it is very important to be able not just to work with our kids, we need to work with the parents as well in order to educate them as well. I don't know. That's what I think.
Yeah, Giselle, I think that's a great point. There's a lot of expectations at play, and some of them might be, as educators, what are our expectations of what our students can do? And then once we've learned that, once I've honed in on what does like positive language development sound like in the preschool classroom, helping the parents of these children understand that as well. Because when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking most of my preschoolers fell in these middle 2 boxes, right? They might start out in pre-production when I get them and they're fresh in the program, but most of my students are in somewhere between early production and speech emergence. Do you know what I wouldn't consider typical of a student who's in a speech emergence stage? Fluently saying the phrase, "Fine, thanks, and you?" That's a really complicated phrase there, right? I'm responding fine with a higher tier vocabulary. Fine, thanks. That's a fragment of a sentence. It doesn't follow traditional subject-verb structure. Then there's a comma and a tag question. And you? If I were to write out those grammar points, that's really complicated language. Like that grammar might come up at a B2 level. But oftentimes when we're teaching young learners, that whole chunk right there might be something that we drill into memory, right? And a 4-year-old can learn that. They can learn the chunk, fine, thanks, and you. They can hear that sound, copy that sound, and say it at appropriate moments. Now, what I don't think they can do is pick apart that phrase, understand what each little piece means and how it's going together. Because I think that phrase is more a part of this box of fluency. That the skills to put that together come way, way later. And so if the language that I'm presenting or the language that my students' parents are expecting is always supposed to sound, fine, thanks, and you? I am from Costa Rica, right? I live in Costa. Like if it's always these full sentence, highly accurate phrases, that doesn't fit in line with where these young learners are at developmentally, right? That's at the peak of their ability. And so it's important that we refine our vision on how much we're headed towards a mix of accuracy and fluency, and also helping parents understand that a lot of the most creative and productive speech of a 3 or 4-year-old is going to come in 1 or 2 word chunks, right? And then if I can set my student up to listen and say, where are you from? And they can answer, from Costa Rica. That's a success right there. That's a piece of grammar at their developmental level. Just as I'm not handing an arts and crafts project that's way too hard, if I'm trying to get my student to answer a question with a 2-word answer, that might fit for a student who's in that speech emergence stage or even in early production. But if I have a class of students who are all in their early production stage or mostly there, and I'm trying to get them to respond, I am from Costa Rica, where are you from? My goal doesn't fit. And if those parents want to hear their children saying that, we need to help guide them to what is it realistic to expect your children speaking at this age? Great comment. So yeah, this is the range I would say most of our preschool students will be within, because this is by their age where they line up. All right, another discussion question I want to think about with all of you. What are some contextual factors in the classroom that support fluency? What are things we can create that will guide our students to speaking creatively, spontaneously, and independently? Those are the 3 of the words I think about inside fluency. Where they're speaking creatively, spontaneously, and independently. Okay, so I see 2 strategies have come up here in chat. Mary shares the idea we could have students singing a song, and Colton shares the idea of using puppets, giving them a chance to speak about a specific topic. Okay, so that's another strategy too. So thinking about the first 2, I want to zoom in really quick, and then we'll bounce over to Giselle's sharing. So in terms of singing a song and using puppets, I could see how both of those activities can lead students towards speaking. Which of those seems more about accuracy and saying things in exactly the right way? And which of those 2 seems more about fluency? Singing a song or using puppets? When I think about singing a song, I'm mainly thinking I need to say the lyrics of the song, right? If I'm going to sing along with Baby Shark, I'm not inventing my own words. I'm saying the correct words in the correct order. So I think oftentimes songs are leading towards more of a kind of repetition, right? A hearing and repeating that seems like a more controlled activity. I think they can be really nice for developing accuracy. And early on in a class, they might be those starting steps to move there. But if I really want to get my students to that later stage of learning where they're speaking creatively and imaginatively, I think once I give them a puppet, and now I tell them to use their voice to speak for the puppet, I think that's going to invite more creative speech. They're going to think in their head, how does Mr. Puppet feel? What is Mr. Puppet's name? And then they say, I am Koshova. I am sleepy, right? And that might lead them to less controlled, more free speech. I also think potentially giving a topic for discussion. I know one of the things that got my preschoolers most fluent was when the circus came to town. Oh man, the Monday after the circus came to La Fortuna, those kids would not stop talking, right? A topic of discussion was established and they all felt their ability to participate in that. They all wanted to talk about the clown Burbujas and all the silly things he was doing, right? So giving a discussion topic, maybe there's been a big storm the night before and you can bring that discussion like last night, like a lot of rain. How did you feel last night? Last night with the rain, were you happy? Were you sad? Were you tired? Were you scared? But that kind of discussion topic, again, can bring them into this communal speaking there too. Would you rather activity, giving some kind of limited choice there too? Yeah, and also having chance to observe full English conversations too. and hearing things slightly above their ability level. Nati, I think that's kind of what I'm reading into your comment. Nati adds, having the chance to observe other people talking in English about things they can fully understand. And adds that it gives the learners the sense of capability, and soon they'll feel confident to have that same conversation. This dates back all the way to Vygotsky and some of his initial observations about how children learned. Vygotsky posited that children primarily learned by observing and imitating the actions of adults. So two children who watch two adults have a conversation have models to kind of aspire to. It's not just seeing a model right at your level, but seeing a model a little bit beyond can also be helpful too. Nice. And Colton's also thinking about how to take something like a book and use what is we might typically think of as a resource for reading to create something to talk about as a group, right? I think all of those ongoing extension activities that bring learning off of the page of a book fall right in line with what Giselle was saying, giving the students a chance to speak about a specific topic. But whereas Giselle might be suggesting the storm or the circus that came to town, Colton's thinking about the power of bilingual read-alongs and extending activities, right? So we start reading a book, that gives our classroom a shared experience, and now we can talk about it. How does the elephant feel? How does the pig feel? Would you rather be the elephant or the pig on this page? All of those questions can get us discussing together the shared reality we're experiencing. Can you think of any contextual factors that hinder fluency development, that stop students from getting to that place where they're speaking quickly and with flow to communicate ideas? Oh, Raquel also adds on, open questions are a powerful tool for fluency. Absolutely, right? If I want to get students speaking creatively and imaginatively, I can't only ask closed questions. If every question has a right answer, that limits the amount of imagination necessary to answer it. But open questions where the answer could be one of many, even infinite things, that really invites the kind of creativity that I find typical of fluent speech. Coastlaw Mobile adds on that talking about things they like their pets, family, and food, can help support fluency. One of the resources you'll find on our resource website is this really cool structure to a show and tell, where a student brings in a mystery object, and then they say 3 descriptions about the object. And then their classmates have to guess what it is based on the description. I thought it was really cool, and it created this moment of structured and facilitated discussion where it was mainly students talking to other students. And the teacher was there giving some order to the conversation, but the activity got a lot of back and forth discussion going. So there's a great 2-minute YouTube video where you can see that strategy model that will come later, Mari. Here are some of the things that I'm thinking about. If I'm trying to guide students towards fluency, I want my lesson to be a gradual release of responsibility. In the beginning, I want everything to be very controlled, very easy, right? Limited choices. Either I'm in control of the language or my students are making a choice between maybe just 2 things. Yes, no, A or B. As the lesson moves on, I want less and less control. Maybe they start choosing between 3 or 4. Having a number of picture cards and having to point to the right one. And as the lesson continues, I want less and less control over the language to where now my students are the ones using it. Rather than me holding everything very tight with closed questions, I want to keep advancing to this place where things are more open and more free. So that's one thing I can do in the classroom that creates a context of moving towards fluency. Always have this gradual reducing of the scaffolding going on. Another thing I can do, right in line with some of the ideas shared in chat, selecting meaningful content and topics that connect to learners' worlds and lives. One of the biggest adjustments I've made to resources I've found for preschoolers is changing the animals. I find so many children's songs are teaching lion, elephant, giraffe. But if I have a room of 4-year-olds, maybe they've never seen a giraffe or a lion or an elephant. Those words are going to be much more abstract concepts than something like squirrel, sloth, iguana, bird, right? Those are going to be very immediate words. So I think too, the more that I can connect speaking to the real world my students live in, right? Maybe the flashcards that I have around places around the town have a post office. I'm going to ask myself, do the towns my students live in have a post office? Because if they're from a small town that doesn't have a post office, that word is going to be a really abstract concept for them, something they've never touched or seen. So the more I can ground the what we're speaking around into the actual words and live experiences of a preschooler. Here's a quote from a student that I think really exemplifies this. One time I was teaching in La Fortuna, and Juan Diego called me over to the window. It looked important, so I went over, and he said, "Teacher, mire, ahí, muy lejos, eso es Costa Rica." And I was like, "Yeah, Juan Diego, that mountain over there is Costa Rica," right? I could see that this student was starting to learn the language of what a country is, but his world size was still growing, right? For him, the size of his world was as far as he could see and know more. And so even though he was starting to have the words to talk about, this is Costa Rica, this is a country, his life experience hadn't caught up with that yet. So making sure the content that we're talking about is sized right and localized right for our students. Finally, another thing that I think contextually supports the move towards fluency is making sure there's space to be creative, imaginative, and express themselves. A lot of the ideas you were sharing in the chat are all about self-expression. What are our likes? What are our dislikes? What are our feelings today? Those are really immediate things to preschoolers. And so it's really easy, or a lot easier for them to think on that self-expression level. I think it's one of the reasons why the main indicator of oral competence for MEP is self-expression. Because that concept of telling you what I think and see in the world, that's linguistically where these young learners are at in their development. I also think too, there's a push for a lot of our activities to be real world, right? And that's one way to get our students into it. They like to play house. Who's mom? Who's dad? Who's the baby? That was the big game on our recess playground, right? So something that can feel a lot like real life can be very inspiring to younger children. I also think giving them space for things to be unreal, to be creative and imaginative, right? That connects back to the skill or the strategy that Colton shared of using puppets, right? A puppet gives the student a chance to practice with made up imaginary things, right? If I'm saying, "My name is Matt," that sentence is always going to look and sound like that. But if I'm suddenly a puppet and I get to say, "My name is Rigoberto," right? That might invite a level of creativity that's newly inspiring. For those students of yours who love to make their peers laugh, something that brings them into the creative or imaginative might be that push to get over that hump and make it towards fluency. On the opposite side of things, several things that might hold students back or keep them from getting to that place where they can start putting words together in their own creative and expressive ways. I think only producing language within controlled activities. This is something that I think it's tempting in the preschool classroom. Because on the one hand, I know as teachers, we're observed in terms of our classroom management, right? How well can we guide students towards learning when they're 3, 4, or 5, and sometimes harder to guide than a room full of cats? I've found this tension in that when I maintain activities that are more controlled in terms of language, it oftentimes lets me have more control over the learners. If everyone is sitting down in a circle on their phone square, and I'm pointing at one student at a time and asking them to speak one word, and everyone else is supposed to be silent, that's a very controlled activity, right? Now, I can try my best to control them and hold them in that space and also make English join into that space. But I need to not fall into the trap of keeping my class in that pattern the whole time, right? I have to let go of the control of the language and move towards something more free, even if that means the classroom gets a little bit less controlled in terms of classroom management. That's why we titled this workshop Loud and Proud. I think really genuinely, if you are giving more space for your preschoolers to speak more freely and try and make that crossing of the bridge towards fluency, your class is going to get louder, right? It's going to feel a little bit less under your control. And I think that's part of the shift that we need to make towards the end of a topic, is bringing in the space for that freedom of language use, knowing that it might also mean a little bit more noise, a little bit more distraction, a little bit less obedience of every rule, and knowing that's okay. It's not going to be my whole classroom. I'm not saying that's it. No more rules, no more obedience. I'm saying that as we shift in the end of a lesson towards that free language use, I also have to know that giving them the space to speak freely might be giving them a little bit of space to fall out of the norms of classroom behavior, right? And I have to be willing to accept a little of that to get to that space where fluency comes. Also, I think a large jump, right? In just a second, I'm going to talk through creating a sequence of 5 or 6 activities that slowly build up towards speaking 1 or 2 words, but making sure there's a lot of tiny steps towards that. And it's not just listen to the teacher speak, now you speak. I think that can work for our faster students and our higher level students. But if there's a big jump from I model language, you speak language, right? I think that can be too big of a jump for some of our students. So in just a moment, we're going to look at what some of the steps in between those 2 spaces may be. I also think for me, one of the biggest factors that can hold back fluency, especially in my preschool class, is not wanting to hear them make mistakes. I think I've got to be ready to hear a lot of mistakes, right? Knowing that many of my students are oscillating between pre-production and early production, anytime they break the silence, especially for my 3-year-olds and a lot of my 4-year-olds, anytime they break the silence is a win for me. If they speak the wrong answer, great. We've crossed over into that space of fluency. We need to bring accuracy back, but you've made that crossover into now you're producing and speaking. And again, we're trying to put together several words. So breaking the silence is step 1, right? And I think one of the things that can keep the silence in the classroom for the longest is if I am constantly offering feedback and recasting everything into 100% accurate statements, right? That's not fun to talk like that. It's going to be really slow and you're going to lose the attention of your students. So I think knowing that as I open up that freedom, there might be a dip in both classroom management in terms of like obedience and also a dip in terms of accuracy. Those are 2 of the ways that I can open the door for more fluent speaking. Alrighty. Any questions or comments about these 6 bullet points I brought up on the screen? Before I move on to our next topic and how to structure a lesson to move towards fluency. All right. Well, I want to show you a model that we use at the Institute for Collaborative Learning. This is how we see all learning processes. And I think in particular, this has really helped me structure language learning lessons when I really think about guiding students through all of these discerning steps. And it's a model called ECRIF. You'll see as we expand out along the top of this triangle, each stage starts with a letter forming that lovely acronym ECRIF. So I'll talk in general about what each stage means and what learners are doing as they progress from stage to stage. Then I'll think about it with you in terms of one specific lesson and how I might teach a topic like feeling vocabulary that's coming up for you all next month in 5 discerning steps in one lesson. So again, this is me zooming in and thinking that during a 45 to 50-minute block of time that I have, maybe less than that, maybe more like a 30-minute block of time that I've got, I'm going to present a new vocabulary topic. And I want to create a sequence of activities that slowly ramps up in terms of difficulty, that starts our students with some controlled accuracy practice, and then slowly takes away the support to guide them towards fluency. So the first thing I want to help my students do is encounter this new language. I want the students to hear this word and realize they don't understand, right? One way I might see this come up is, let's say I've been doing my morning routine with happy, sad, tired, angry, and my students have gotten really good at those. And now I put out a brand new word card, hungry. And I say, hungry, hungry. And the student sees the card and they hear the word and they go, eso es nuevo. That moment of realization is when my student has an encounter. Boom, there's something new for me to learn. And they start seeing a picture on that card and hearing the word hungry and constructing this concept in their head. Same thing for the word scared. I show the card, say scared, and go, oh. That could be an encounter with the word scared. They hear the word, see it acted out in some kind of meaningful way, and have this realization of, something new, an encounter. After students encounter language, they start clarifying what that language means and how to use it. They start making simple choices about the new language as they hear it, considering if it's correct in its form, meaning, and use. So if I want to guide my students to move from encountering to clarifying, I want to start giving them simple decisions to make. I want to start saying, am I scared? Yes. Am I hungry? No. Right? That might be one type of simple controlled choice where my student is doing or showing something to show me that they're clarifying their concept of what these words mean, right? As students move on past clarifying, they start remembering. That's this process of starting to move something from the short-term memory, what's going on today, into the long-term memory. What do I want to bring with me for tomorrow? Around remember is when I think students really start speaking something. So I might need to get 3 activities into my lesson before I start holding up a picture card and saying, what is this? Is this hungry or scared? Before my student can say scared, they need to have those sounds up in their memory, right? They're not repeating that word anymore. It's now coming from the inside of them. So to get to that layer of learning here, it needs to come from memory. That means in encounter and clarify, They need to hear me speaking these words a lot. That's why you'll see in Encounter, students hear the language. In Clarify, they hear it some more. All of the input they're getting receptively in these stages is what sets the stage for them to get here and hopefully start speaking, even if it's just one single word. One word at the correct time. No fluency, but one accurate word at one accurate moment, right? That's where remember starts. As students refine that skill and get better at faster pulling something from their memory, they start to internalize. And internalization is the continuation of that move from short-term to long-term memory. I really think of internalization as connecting the new to the old, right? So if I learn a new word, hungry, and in my mind, I think, cuando estoy hungry? Estoy hungry en la mañana y mi mamá me hace huevos y pinto, right? Like that internal monologue of me connecting the word hungry to pinto en la mañana, that's a connection there that's deep, because that might be something I eat almost every day. And now I have this connection between a new piece of vocabulary and a lived experience of mine. I think that's the key to cementing new words, new language in your long-term memory, is taking the new and connecting it to something that's deep and old. So oftentimes when students start sharing their opinion about something, do you like this? Do you have a dog? Do you have a cat? When they say, yes, I have. No, I don't have. When they start connecting these new words to their own lived experience, the words start to become internal. Dog, yes, cat, no, right? Those aren't just abstract words anymore. They're expressions about their own life. Finally, I want to guide students into a place of using words fluently, right? Maybe they can go up to each other, look, have their best, how are you? And then answer, happy, sad, right? And do a little mingle activity and ask something like that. But that students start using the language in communication. So it's between people, right? You never communicate by yourself. There's always a sender and receiver in communication. So by the end of a lesson, I want to try and create a space where my students have some kind of interaction between them, and they're trying to speak in some potentially creative or spontaneous way. Now, there is a shift here. Those starting phases are much more controlled. Encounter, Clarify are all highly controlled activities. And from Clarify to Remember, we're still somewhat controlled in terms of what the language is. I, the teacher, put most things together, and my students make tiny decisions about it. As we start moving from Remember to Internalize, activities become more free for the students. They have more decisions to make, and it becomes a lot more complex. And that idea of a fluency activity is very free. Now, let me give you a more specific example of this, showing you in one specific lesson, and then I want to see what questions you have about ePref. So let's imagine that it's June, and I am working on emotions, and I'm trying to teach 4 new pieces of feeling vocabulary. Here's how I would lay out 30 minutes of class time for my students. I would start out by showing the students image cards with 4 new feelings and saying those words, probably doing a little gesture and making a face at the same time too. So they're seeing, hearing, and experiencing these 4 new emotions. And I go through them several times, right? I want my students to be hearing these words a lot, hearing that model again and again. Hungry, scared, hungry, right? And I might not be asking them to repeat. If they are repeating, okay. But I know silence is a big part of their learning. So when I'm in the encounter, what's most important is that I'm speaking a lot. I'm okay with the fact that students might not speak these words until we get into that fuchsia color in the middle. After I've done a lot of repetition showing them these cards and saying these words, I might read one of my favorite Elephant and Piggy books. And in this book, it's all about being scared and hungry. And on every page, I might stop to ask, is Piggy scared? No. Is Elephant scared? Yes. Right? Is Elephant hungry? No. Is Piggy hungry? No. So we go through this book, and my students are answering simple, controlled questions. They might only be saying yes or no. Maybe they're silent, and I'm just having them give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. But they're using simple language to clarify their understanding of these feelings, even before I challenge them to speak the new words. After we've done that, now we might start playing a game where I do something like Simon Says. Okay, students, I'm going to say a word and you are going to make a face. And I say, scared. And then they all go, hungry. And we play a game like that. As I'm doing that, I'm starting to pull information out of their memory. In order for a student to do this top task and remember, they have to have something in their head already. They have to have ¿qué significa hungry here? Or ¿qué significa scared? Significa asustado. Significa con hambre, right? Because if they have the concept here, they can show me the concept here. Then I might move on to a fourth activity that gets a little bit harder. I'm going to give them 2 remember activities here. And now I'm going to say, okay, now I'm going to make a face. And I want you all to try and say the word. So I make a face and wait. And then one student goes, scared. And I'm like, yeah, Fabiana, that's scared. And I'll do several repetitions of that too, right? Both of these activities are pushing the students to remember. Here, I'm trying to have them remember the meaning of these new vocabulary words. Here, I'm trying to have them remember the pronunciation. So I'm going step by step. I'm going to show you the meaning, let you hear the pronunciation, and let you see the meaning on my face. I'm going to let you practice only expressing a simple yes or no. Now I'm going to try and challenge you to remember the meaning. And then in our fourth activity in my lesson plan, that's the first time I'm going to actually challenge these students. Speak these 4 pieces of target language. That might be how it looks for me today. After that, I want to give the students a little bit more freedom, so more time to speak, and I want to let them speak about something that relates to themselves. This might be where I get into, Sebastian, how are you today? Right? I might pull out my guitar and play the hello song that's all about feelings and go student by student and say, how are you today? And maybe in that moment, I'm curious, how many of my students will use the new words to tell me how they're feeling? And it probably won't be all of them, but I can start to notice which of these students can use new language to talk about themselves. Those students have started internalizing. Maybe I could do an activity where I'm going to say, okay, chicos, yo voy a describir algo que me pasó en español y ustedes me van a decir en inglés cómo se sentirían. Ok, imagínense, anoche yo quise comer una galleta que puse en la refri, pero mi hermana lo comió y yo no podía comer mi galleta. ¿Cómo se sentirían? Hungry. Yeah, I felt angry and hungry. So that might be another activity where, again, I'm getting them to make these personal connections. How would I feel in that situation, right? I'm practicing a little bit of empathy. And again, using these words in some way that's personally relevant to them, right? That story might remind them, es que
hermano también comió mi galleta de la refri y yo también estaba angry.
Right? Like, boom. The moment I make that connection, Gael is not going to forget the word angry. He's going to hear angry and think, hermano, galleta, Fabian, angry. Like, that's going to be locked in there because we've reached that internal place. And maybe I might then at the end of this, if I want one extra activity to tuck into this internalized stage, give the students a game where, just like I was doing it earlier, say, okay, at your table, you are the leader. You are going to say one emotion, happy, sad, angry, hungry, scared. And your table is going to go and make a face. And I give them a game where one student at a time is practicing speaking and knowing that whatever words they say is going to change the faces of the people around them. Those might be all the different ways I'm trying to create these rich, interactive moments that connect new words to something old inside of a student. Finally, I want to give some space to see how fluent can my students speak, right? I might have students ask each other, how are you feeling? And see how many different emotions can they answer with, right? I might even, after giving my students time to ask each other, like I know one of the things we've got, I think it's in a picture that's coming back. Let me go back here. Here we go. So I'm going to have my students pull out their PVC pipe cell phones. These are great. One trip to the ferreteria and like 5,000 colones, you can make a classroom set of phones. And as the student talks into one end, they hear themselves. It's really great for pronunciation. So I say, okay, everybody grab your cell phone. You're going to call a classmate. Abigail, you're going to call Marilu. And you're going to say, hello, Marilu. How are you? I'm scared. Okay, goodbye, Marilu. And we model that. And that's the role play conversation that we're going to have with our cell phones. And that might be this fluency activity that I build up to at the end of my class. I want to create a moment between them and see how much can you do with our 4 new words. Now, somewhere along the way, I might have lost you. You might have gone, not in my classroom. The moment I tell them, work with a partner, 2 cell phones, un desastre. That would not work. I do not think in any preschool class that I've entered, when I bring this sequence of activities, I never imagined that every single one of my students is going to successfully make it through all 5 stages. Not the first time, right? Now, I want to see the first time I bring this topic into the classroom, I might want to do this whole sequence to see how far can my students get? Which students can successfully do the clarify activity? Which students are still doing the remember activity well? How many of them could do the internalize activity? And how many of them went silent right then because it was too much for them? Were 1 or 2 of my students able to do the phone call on the first day? So I'm going to do this sequence knowing that on day 1, I'm going to lose students. Slowly, as the activities get harder, less and less students are going to be with me. And that's okay, right? It might mean that at the very last 5 or 10 minutes, half of the students are kind of fading out of the activity and exploring the space. But remember that freedom to explore the space is one of the things that MEP is trying to make a part of our countrywide habit. So knowing that I might lose some people from the main event at the center of the class is okay on day 1. In just a second, I want to go on to this slide and talk about how I might think of repeating these activities over a month. So that's coming in just a sec. Before we talk about that, are there any questions about this sequence of ECRIF or what it might mean to create a sequence of activities that guide students through these different steps? Feel free to jump in on the next slide and let me know if you're still typing a question. Now, like I told you, thanks, love your comment, Marty. So let's say on July 5th, I try this out, or sorry, June 5th. I think that's the month I've pulled up here. On the first day that I want to bring this new language into the classroom, I'm going to go through all 5 steps. And I'm going to do it as like a pre-assessment. The same way we all asked all of you at the beginning of this webinar about the skills we'd be covering in our attendance survey, and we'll ask you at the end. The first time I bring new content, I want to give my students at least one activity at every level of complexity in ECRIF. Because I might already have one student who heard these words on a YouTube video that their mom plays every day, and they're ready to do internalizing or fluency. So on the first day when I'm just assessing, I need to give them at least 5 minutes at each space to see, are there any students who can, right? If I don't open the door, no one can walk through it. So on day 1, I need to give at least a little opportunity to everything to assess. But then I might see that after the 5th, okay, all of my students were with me in the encounter. Many of them were saying yes or no and clarifying. But by the time we got to remember, and I said, okay, Abigail, what is this? Abigail just looked at me. And that was what most of her classmates were like. I might see that and think, okay, most of my students have started clarifying, but they're not yet remembering. So I want to give them more time at this level of difficulty. So I might take this sequence, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and do that on Tuesday and Wednesday. And then I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and do that on Thursday and Friday. So I keep repeating those same 5-minute activities, or repeating them with a tiny change. And now I'm just going to slowly start working them up. But in week 1, after my assessment day, I'm going to keep stopping here. And I'm going to say, okay, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 15 minutes of my class, I'm going to do 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, and just keep repeating encounter, clarify, remember, encounter, clarify, remember. Then on the next week, I'm going to shift it up a notch. Okay, my students have had 5 days of always me showing them the word cards first. Now in week 2, I'm going to start them here. The first thing we're going to do, show a card, ask them yes or no. I'm going to start with clarify. And now in this week 2, I'm going to still be doing 15 minutes reviewing this one topic. Daniela, you're keeping me grounded in the realities of what we got to do. It's got to be that fun and engaging, right? I like it. So again, this idea of, I know I've got to be moving fast and quick to keep up with young learners, right? So I might only get 10 to 15 minutes in every one of the subsequent days to keep repeating this topic. So week 2, I'm going to just do clarify, remember, and try to get up to where my students are playing Simon Says, right? In week 3, I'm going to then start slowly shifting into using with fluency, and then continue down and down and down until by the end, we've just made it a habit that every day I can ask them, how are you today? And they're not just speaking with the 4 feeling words we started at the beginning of the month, but they're using all 8 of our words together. So this process of repeating activities, either exactly or with small changes, helps me slowly shift students away from the more controlled activities and towards the more fluent, right? I'm kind of creating an easy transition from pre-production, early production, and on towards fluency up here. So yeah, any questions or things that stirred up? What happens if a student just answered happy? Should we encourage them to express more? I think that's a great question. For me, Raquel, when I see that, my question comes back to, where is my student at in this process, right? Now, if today the cards that I've been showing have just been happy, sad, scared, excited, if I haven't been covering grammar at all, like if I haven't been giving a lot of examples of longer phrases, well then, if here I start hearing the student saying happy, if I start giving them a full phrase now, that's not going on to the next step. If I get them saying happy, sad, scared, excited, happy, sad, scared, excited, and then I go, okay, Raul, say, I am happy. What I'm actually doing, instead of moving from remember to internalize and getting harder with the same language, I'm creating a brand new encounter. I've basically said, my students started remembering individual vocabulary words, and now I want them to encounter new grammar. So that's one way to do it. I would make sure, if I'm in a lesson where I'm only working on teaching these as isolated words, I'm going to keep getting harder and harder with just the isolated words, right? Maybe do a game between themselves with just the word happy. And then maybe the next week, we do an encounter with, I am happy. I am sad. But we might have to take that chunk of language of, I am blank, you are blank. And that language, we're going to have to move through this sequence as well. So my strategy would be, I'm going to try and guide students towards fluency with the little bit. And then once they have these isolated words down, then I'm going to come back, and on the next day or the next week, I'm going to create a sequence of activities that adds in the longer expression, right? So if I haven't taught it yet, I don't want to just instantly say, speak more, right? If I'm teaching individual words and Raul says an individual word, he's done it. He's met my expectation, and I want to celebrate that. If the activity is guiding students to say happy and sad, tired and hungry, right? And that's where we're at. And most of the class is saying it like that. And Raul just says one, I might try and encourage him to come up to where everyone else is at, right? If that's a part of the movement of the class and today's objective, right? I might do some recasting and saying, oh, Raul is happy, to give them that input of the higher level speech, but making sure that I'm not guiding them back to a brand new encounter just because I'm starting to see a little bit of production, right? The moment I hear them start speaking, I want to keep moving one or two steps more complex, right at that same level. Okay, they say these feeling words by themselves. Now I want to do it in a game, and now I want to do it in a role play where it's still just single words. And then once I see the class consistently doing it with single words, then I'm going to try and guide them all towards, okay, how could we say these as 2-word chunks? How could we say it as 3-word chunks, right? I might even start out with that next chunk beyond happy, just being subject and emotion. We look at a picture and we say, okay, teacher, elephant happy, iguana sad, bird hungry, dog tired, cat angry, mouse excited. And they're pointing at pictures of animals. And for me, that might be the next step up in fluency. How can I stick 2 words together? Even though I'm missing a verb, I'm still building up fluency. We've gone from 1-word utterances to 2-word utterances, right? And I can keep building up from there. But every time I give them a new building block, I'm giving them a new encounter. right? And so I want to make sure if I'm going to give you a new building block, subject plus emotion, I need to give you a new sequence of activities at all of these different stages of learning, because every learner is going to go through this process with every new bit of language. Alrighty, we're nearing the end of our time together. Are there any questions floating around in your head? Thoughts that have come to you around this topic of oral competency, or inspirations you're carrying back into the classroom? Feel free to let us know in chat, to unmute and share out loud, or share in any other way you like. Also, while we're collecting questions, thoughts, and inspirations, it's that time again. Like and subscribe, fill out the registration form. We've got that link in our chat right there. So please make sure that's the first thing you do. We also have a feedback form for you. After you've done the registration that lets us know you were here, this is going to let us know what from today was helpful. It's also going to give a space for you to let us know, what do you want to learn more about in the future? So we can keep planning webinars and selecting topics that are going to help you with your day-to-day challenges. The last thing I want to plug, and I'll show you this in just a second, is our resource site. So for each of the webinars that we're offering, we're creating a curated list of article and video resources that build out more on this topic. So I'm going to share my screen in just a second and talk you through what resources we have. I also want to look over to chat, where Janya has shared that this kind of webinar is really important for her, and that feedback makes her feel at peace with her process of being a teacher. I'm glad, Janya. I connect with you in that, and I hope hearing some of those things, like knowing silence is the goal, right? One of the things we've got to give these learners is 6 months of silence, and we got to give it like a gift, right? And I know there's that voice inside of you, at least for me, that's going, come on, speak, make today be just do it, come on, speak the English, right? Like, I want that really hard as a teacher, but I also recognize the reality that I have to give a lot of space for silence. It's not a sign of me doing something wrong, but me walking down this path where there's a lot of signs that might make me think I'm going in the wrong direction. Ooh, silence. Ooh, they're making mistakes, right? Ooh, they just got silent after they were talking. But all of these things are what that process of working towards fluency at a preschool level looks like. I'm glad to know it's clarified some of your doubts, Raque. Thanks for what you shared.
So Matt, I'll tell you a little story. When I taught preschool many years ago in Japan, I had a student who did that last thing that you said. He was silent, totally silent. His name was Genki. He didn't talk at all for months. And all of a sudden, one day he took me to the window and he said, the blue bird is on the tree. And I'm like, what? Said a whole sentence. So I think the other beautiful thing about this age is we know that there's sort of a long period where they're going to be listening. We know that our expectations just have to be very flexible, and we have to be open to surprise.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really helped me bringing eCRIF into the preschool classroom, is thinking about how in the very first few months of preschool, I need to give a lot of space for silence. And in the first 15 minutes of a brand new topic, I need to give more space for silence, right? I need to be really okay with the first introduction to a new topic being me speaking and them listening, right? And there's opportunities where they can, but that I slowly want to build up to that as well. Colton shares in chat too that they've had a student from South Korea that of 6 months of just yeses and nos on the last day of school said, "Thank you, Mr. Colton. Good summer." Yeah, love it. I also want to share with you all our resource website. On this website, you'll see a curated list of all of our 2013 webinars. So we've got 3 different preschool webinars coming for you. There are 2 webinars geared towards primary teachers 2 more geared towards high school teachers, and 3 webinars for all MEP teachers. If you come in here and click on this first pre-K number 1 training, all of these resources are where I did my research for today's topic. So we've got a handful of videos and articles for you to look at. You can find the slideshow that I've shared with you today. If I went too quickly by one of the slides and you want to take a peek, you can find the eCRIF website that Mary and her collaborator Josh created for this wonderful, useful framework on learning. There's a lot of great video resources from the US State Department, as well as the National Geographic Learn platform, giving a lot of specific strategies like using puppets or picture cards, using something like a mystery bag. So a lot of good videos of hands-on techniques you can copy and try out in your classroom. And then a lot of great articles with more resources to get more into the science of this, right? For instance, that article on oral language development. This is where I pulled the information for that yellow slide, thinking of that shift from pre-production to early production towards fluency. So a lot of great things to look at here. I really love this resource from the US State Department. I think it was Raquel, let me double check. Yeah, Raquel asked a question of, when a student answers something short and we want to try and make it bigger, this handout from the State Department called Talk, Ring, and Sing Every Day Together has this great strategy towards turning thin conversations into thick conversations. And it's this really cool, really conversational technique. I'm going to show you right where it is. It's right here. And it shows you, okay, this is when you get stuck in this just yes, yes, yes pattern from a student. And here's a way to shift what the adult in the room is saying to try and pull bigger chunks of language out of the child. So I think this resource is kind of tailored for both parents and teachers, but I think this technique right here is really useful in that language space when, like Raquel is noticing, I know my student can do more. How do I pull a little bit more out of them? So that resource, as well as others, is on our resource site. I'll share the link for that resource site in our chat right now.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah. Big thank you to all of the teachers for showing up. Again, we know coming home after a long day at work and putting your head and your heart back out there to learn more about teaching is a gift of your time. So on behalf of your students and your schools, your communities in MEP, thank you for your time. We want to thank MEP, all of our partners in the regional advisors all around the country, as well as the national advisors who always guide us and help collect your needs and share them with us. We want to thank the U.S. Embassy in San Jose for funding this training and continually giving us the opportunity to connect with all of you and create this space of sharing.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great evening. Have a good dinner. Is anybody else hungry? I'm hungry. Let's go have dinner.
I'm hungry.
Hey.
Some of us may have snuck it in during the cinema.
Oh, come on, you could have sent it here, man.
a snack or two.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.